want to welcome everyone here tonight to our next installment on First Kings. Tonight we're going to be looking at Elijah and Ahab and a little bit about Jezebel. She's mentioned in the first chapter, and then we don't see her anymore until next week. We'll probably run into some of the things that she's doing. So let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us in his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. All right. So tonight, like I said, we're going to be in 1 Kings chapters 19 and 20. And here we are in this, you see here, 1 Kings. Now, Chronicles, there's not a corresponding chapter in Chronicles for this segment here. So we'll actually pick up in Chronicles next week, and when it's talking about Ahab and the king of Judah at the same time, Jehoshaphat. All right. So and again, just to refresh your memory as to the divided kingdom, you got Judah down here and Israel up here. And tonight we're going to be talking about areas right here around Samaria. A lot of this is going to be centered around Samaria. And then we'll talk about Beersheba and then also Mount Sinai. Mount Horeb, as it calls it here. All right. Any comments or questions that you might have here? We're looking at just this area here, small section of the timeline here with Ahab. Are there any comments or questions that you might have before we get jumping into this tonight? All right. Let's go ahead and get into the word then. Then Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So let the gods do to me and worse if by this time tomorrow I don't make your life like the life of one of them." And so frightened, Elijah, he got up and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, he left his servant there, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom bush. Sometimes they call it a juniper tree. And he prayed that he might die. He said, "It's just too much. I've had it. Now, Adonai, take my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." So, we see up here that, Ahab, no, he was not a king. I mean, he was really just a horrible king. He was just a tool in the hands of Jezebel, and she was evil, mean, and wicked. And if Ahab had had any kind of intelligence at all, he would have figured out that their association with Baal and all of the pagan religion that goes along with it was fraudulent. It wasn't working very well, and so we have to figure out that he did know the truth, but he was a tool of Jezebel, and so he was a weak person. And so they had put to death the 400 priests of the Asherah of the Asherah poles, the worship of Asherah and Baal, and so just Ahab didn't have the guts to do any of that. It took Elijah to go actually out there and actually do it. And so he was telling Jezebel all of these things. And so when she heard about that, her 450 pagan priests and how they had been defeated by Elijah and executed, actually, she, as she had actually heard that story of how that God sent the fire down and burned up all of the offering, the altar, the offering, and all of that, then she would have probably figured out that maybe I'm not the that the worship of Baal and all of that was not good. So, but she didn't do that. She just doubled down, and so she said that she's going to get Elijah. So Moses, Moses was in this situation in a way, and so was Jonah. Their depression had just gotten so low that Elijah, he's sitting under this tree, and he's just so down, and he's hungry, so he's worn out from that. He's worn out from nights and days of travel. He's probably almost having a heat stroke out there in the wilderness, and so everything was against him. So in all of this stuff, you can imagine that he was a little bit down. So basically, he just gave up. He just said, "I'm done with it. It's enough. Just Lord, let me die. I'm tired, and I've lived a life, and just let me die." But God was not done with him yet, and so he said. Then he lay down and slept under the broom bush. Then behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." So he looked, and to his surprise, there by his head there was a cake baked on the hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and then laid down again. And then the angel of Adonai came again a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, because the journey is too much for you." So he arose and ate, and he drank. And in the strength of that meal, then it says 40 days and 40 nights, went to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. They're synonymous. They're the same thing. And so Elijah, he was at the end of his resources. I mean, he was done. He was spent. He had nothing left in him. And so at that point, then God sent an angel to him to refresh him and to get him back going again. So this was, of course, that was miraculous in itself, that an angel would have come. But then the food itself must have been pretty powerful, because it was enough to sustain him for 40 days and 40 nights until he got to Mount Horeb. Now, from Beersheba, or even a day out of Beersheba, to the Sinai in the Arabian Peninsula, it would have taken about 14 days. And so, here he had 40 days, so he had enough to get him there. So it took him 40 days to get to a journey that was only 14 days. So it looks like God kind of had him kind of like the Israelites wandering through the desert. He had to have a little bit of talk with Elijah too. Now, this is up on the top of Mount Sinai, okay? And this is what some people are calling Elijah's cave, right here. And see, here's Mount Sinai. You can see it's kind of funny how that maybe not that you can tell it from this particular angle, but just the top of this thing is still very dark. It's kind of blackened out in a way. And this is Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, is not in the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, this is Jebel el-Lawz in the Arabian Peninsula. And that's right here in this area here. Now, the traditional Mount Sinai is over here, but nothing matches in terms of the descriptions of it. There are no caves around Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. Everything else matches over here. You'll remember that when Moses left Egypt, he went over to Midian. Well, this is Midian here, this area on the Arabian Peninsula. That was what it was known as Midian. This area in the Sinai Peninsula is not known as Midian. So Moses would have had to been over here, and of course, then he saw the burning bush up on top of Mount Sinai, or on the mountain someplace. He wasn't probably up at the top, but he was there on Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb, and so it's kind of interesting to me that then when Elijah is running for his life and so forth, he went all the way to Mount Horeb, going back to where God had given Israel the Ten Commandments, and basically where he gave them the law. And so what was Elijah trying to do? He was trying to restore Israel back to the law. And so maybe it was an attempt by Elijah. We don't really know, but maybe it was an attempt by him to get back to basics and say, okay, well, this is where we first got the law. Maybe I can get the inspiration from this going back to where we first got the law. And so going ahead with this, let's see. When he arrived there at the cave, he spent the night there. Then, behold, the word of Adonai came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah answered and said, "I have been very zealous for Adonai Svaot, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, slain your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it." Then he said, "Come out and stand on the mountain before Adonai." So behold, Adonai was passing by. A great mighty wind was tearing at the mountain and shattering cliffs before Adonai, but Adonai was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but Adonai was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire, but Adonai was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a soft whisper of a voice. As soon as Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then all of a sudden, a voice addressed him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" You know, that small voice. And he says, he gave him the same answer as he did before. "I have been very zealous for Adonai Svaot, and for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, slain your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they are seeking to take my life." So Elijah, you know, he stated to God, he just told him, said, "Look, I am flat wore out, and I'm disappointed, I'm depressed, I'm discouraged." And you know what? It's all right to do that sometimes. That's not a sign of weakness to admit to God that we're weak. In fact, that's the beginning of strength, is when we can come to the Lord and says, you know, I can't do it anymore. Paul said that, "In my weakness, there's strength in God." And so that's where God's strength really comes to show, is when we admit that we're the weak ones. And, you know, we can't do it all on our own. We can't go out and just do everything, because that's not the way God works. And so here Elijah was doing that. And so his zeal for God's covenant and altars and prophets, that was all admirable. But, you know, he came too discouraged because he underestimated the extent of commitment to Hashem, to God, that still existed in Israel. He's saying, I'm the only one. And yet God said, no, we got about 7,000 that haven't bowed to Baal. That's still a small number, but it's a remnant. God works through the remnants. And so God asked him, well, what are you doing here, Elijah? Because guess what? Read the scripture carefully. God did not send Elijah to Mount Horeb. Elijah sent Elijah to Mount Horeb. And so you remember God had sent him to the brook Cherith, and then he had sent him up to Zarephath, and then he sent him to Samaria. But God did not send Elijah to Mount Horeb. He had done that on his own out of fear of Jezebel. So God then proceeded to demonstrate his power. And if you think about it, it's very, very similar to what he did for the children of Israel on Mount Sinai when he gave them the 10 Commandments. When he first gave us the law, he had the high wind and the earthquake, and his voice spoke. It said like shofars. It was terrifying to the people, and yet this time though, God used a different method. Instead of all that pomp and circumstances, the shock and awe, he decided, no, I'm just going to talk to you just quietly in like a gentle blowing wind. And so there again, God works in his own ways. And so sometimes we have to be careful that we don't miss God and miss what he's talking to us about by putting him in the box that, well, this is the way you did it before, and thinking that this is the way you got to do it now. But no, God works in different ways, and so we cannot put him in a box. That's something that we can learn here from Elijah, that that God's going to work in his own way and his own timing, and we cannot put him in a box. And so then Adonai said to him, "Go and return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you get there, point Hazael, king over Aram, that's up in Damascus, and anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, the king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, easy for you to say all those, as prophet in your place. And it shall come to pass that whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu will slay, and whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha will slay. Yet I have preserved 7,000 in Israel whose knees have not bowed to Baal and whose mouth has not kissed him." Okay, so let's see if I can get okay, here we go. So God, he directs Elijah then to go down to Israel and to do those three things, and that was to he went to go to Elijah and anoint Elisha. Go to Elisha and anoint him personally as a successor, and he anointed Hazael as the next king of Aram, and Jehu as the next king of Israel. Of Judah. And so these. That's what he did. And he also mentioned that, okay, we got 7,000 people who are still loyal followers of Hashem left in Israel. And then we mentioned the writer of First Kings does mention them in later chapters and verses. So here again, this is evidence that God is working through a remnant. He doesn't always have to have everybody there. And we know that So going ahead then, well, I'll just read the rest of the chapter. There's what it amounts to. That. So he departed from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, while he was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen before him, and he was with the 12th. So that does not mean that he had like the 20 mule team borax thing of all of these oxen strung out in front of a plow. No, he had 12 plows out there, and they were and each one of those plows had 2 oxen. So um, um, going on with the verses here. Then Elijah crossed over to him and threw his mantle on him. And so he left the oxen and ran after Elijah, said, "Let me please kiss my father and my mother, then I will follow you." And he said, "Come back," he called to him. What have I done to you?" So he returned from following him and put the pair of oxen uh, and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the oxen's yoke gear, gave it to the people, and they ate. And then he arose, went after Elijah, and became his attendant. So Elisha was a prosperous farmer. You can tell because he had 12 pairs of oxen out there plowing a field. So he had 24 oxen, and he lived near Abel Meholah, and that's in the Jordan Valley. It's about 23 miles south of the Galilee. And so by throwing this cloak over Elisha, that was symbolizing the passing of power and authority of the office of a prophet to that individual. Now, when he said, "What have I done to you?" For what have I done to you? That is an idiom. Okay, that's just an expression or a saying that means go do as you please. When Elisha said, "Let me go say my goodbyes to my mother and my father." And so at that point, then Elisha quit being a farmer, and from then on, he served as a prophet to a prophet of the Lord, and he sacrificed his oxen that he was plowing with, the 2 that he was plowing with, and then he burned up the plow that he was using, used that as the wood for the altar. And so basically that was saying, I am done with my old life. I am now going to do this new thing. And because I've already slaughtered my oxen and burned up the yoke and the plow and all of that. So there's really nothing more than I can do. I'm going to follow Elijah and be a prophet. And so we don't know, why the symbolism of the 12 pairs of oxen. Maybe it just was meant to be the represent the 12 tribes of Israel. It's not stated. We don't know, but it's kind of interesting, I think. So anyway, that closed out chapter 19. Now, are there any comments or questions regarding this so far? Somebody to say something so I can get a drink. Okay, well, I got a drink anyway. So if there's no comments or questions on that, then let's continue on. Now, King Ben-hadad of Aram, that's of Damascus, Syria, basically, gathered all his army. With him were 32 kings, along with horses and chariots. He marched up, besieged Samaria, and attacked it. Then he sent messengers to the city to King Ahab of Israel, and he said to him, "Thus says Ben-hadad, your silver and gold are mine. Your best wives and children are mine." And so the king replied, "As you say, my lord the king, I am yours, along with all I have." Then the messengers came back and said, "Thus says Ben-hadad, indeed I sent word to you, ordering you to give me your silver and your gold, your wives and your children. Now I will send my servants to you tomorrow at this time, and they shall search your palace and the houses of your courtiers. Whatever is valuable in their eyes, they will seize in their hand and take it away." Then the king of Israel summoned all the elders of the land and said, "Please know and see how this man is bent on evil. For he had sent someone to me for my wives, my children, my silver, and my gold, and I didn't refuse him." All the elders and all of the people said to him, "Don't listen to him or consent." So he said to the messengers of Ben-hadad, "Tell my lord the king, all that I have that you sent to your servant at first, I will do. But this thing I cannot do." The second part of where he allows them to go into the city and just basically rape and pillage. The messengers departed and reported to him. Then Ben-hadad sent word to him again, saying, "May the gods do so to me and even more, if the dust of Samaria will suffice for handfuls of all the people at my feet." Then the king of Israel answered and said, "Tell me, let not the one who puts on his armor boast like the one who takes it off." On hearing his reply, while he and the other kings were drinking in the booths, he said to his servants, "Take your positions." So they stationed themselves against the city. All right. Hadad had sieged, he'd laid siege to the city of Samaria. Now we don't know how long the siege had been going on. Sometimes the siege would last 2 or 3 years. It just depended. Jerusalem was very hard to take because they had adequate water supplies. Now, eventually, several years after this, Nebuchadnezzar came in, and he did lay siege to Jerusalem, but it was still quite a while, many months that it took them to finally break Israel down. Even the Romans had a tough time with Jerusalem, and so we don't really know how long the siege was, but evidently it was completed, and Israel was defeated, so that Ben-hadad gave him the order, the terms of surrender, and Ahab said, "Yeah, well, I can do that." And just imagine, though. I mean, here he says, "Okay, everything that you have, King Ahab, I want all your silver and gold, and not only that, I want your wives and your children too." And so basically what that would have been a ploy to take the wives, and he would kill all the children. And the idea of taking the wives, though, in the Eastern mentality of the day, was that if you took over a king's wives, then you had surely defeated him. And that was one way of letting everyone know that you're the alpha dog there, that you had gone in there and defeated the king, and you even took his wives, that which was most intimate with him. And so you got to think, though, now, who was Ahab married to? Well, he was married to Jezebel. So can you imagine how she would have twisted off about that? Here she is, the head lady in the harem, and so then to find out that her husband had just given her away to the enemy. And so you can imagine what thoughts were going through her head, that here she'd been the daughter of the priest of Phoenicia, and where they worshipped Baal and Astarte, Asherah, and how they had that had all those hundreds of priests, and they'd built a temple and done all of the sacrifices to Baal and Astarte, and so all of these things that they'd done, and guess what? They didn't save her from Ben-hadad. And so you would think then that when she figured out that, okay, later on, that when God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was the one that saved her, that she would have, had a little change of heart. But no, there's no evidence that she ever exhibited the even the slightest degree of appreciation to God, or remorse for her former life or anything. So anyway, that's that's where we are at this point. Then is Ahab says, "Yeah, you can have all of my gold, but leave everybody else alone. I can't agree to the rest of it." And Ben-hadad says, "Okay, I'm coming to get you, and we're going to destroy everything anyway." And so then at that point, it says, the Bible says, "Then behold, a prophet approached King Ahab of Israel and said, Thus says Adonai, have you seen all this great multitude? Behold, I will deliver it into your hand this day, and you will know that I am Adonai." Ahab asked, "By whom?" And he says, "Thus says Adonai, by the young men of the rulers of the provinces." Then he asked, "Who should begin the battle?" And he said, "You," he answered. And so he mustered the young men of the rulers of the province, and there were 232 of them. After them, he mustered all of the people of all of the children of Israel, 7,000. Pretty pitiful, actually, when you consider it. They marched out at noon while Ben-hadad was drinking himself drunk in the booths. The booths being little shelters, they'd built themselves little Sukkots so that they would be sheltered from the sun. And he and the 32 kings allied with him. The young men of the rulers of the province marched out first. Ben-hadad sent out scouts who reported to him, saying, "There are men coming out from Samaria." And he says, "Whether they are coming out for peace, take them alive, or whether they are coming out for battle, take them alive." So now when the young men of the rulers of the provinces marched out of the city with the army following them, each man struck down his foe. Then the Arameans fled, and Israel pursued them. But King Hadad of Aram escaped on a horse with horsemen. Then the king of Israel went out, struck the horses and chariots, and inflicted on the Arameans a great defeat. All right, so this prophet came to King Ahab, and said, "You look out here at all of these enemies, everybody that's against you, and guess what? Today, I'm going to hand them over to you, so that why? So that you know that I am Adonai. I am God. I am the one, and not Baal, and not Astarte, not Asherah, and what all of these other things, Molech, and all those other little g gods." God says, "I'm going to do all of this because they will know that I am God." And so basically, he says, "Well, how are we going to do that?" And he says, "Gather your people up, all of the princes of the provinces." And so these would have been guys that would have been from all over Israel, who served the king in some fashion or capacity there in Samaria. And so then he would have taken these guys, and then they gathered up everybody else. And how that really worked, I don't know if they sent out messengers or however it got to them, or there were maybe just 7,000 people that they could muster up out of the city of Samaria. It's a little unclear, but anyway, they did this. and they went out against Ben-hadad. Now, if you consider, okay, they had 7,000 people of Israel, plus these 232 officers, and Ben-hadad had about 130,000. Okay, so that was, that was quite a disparity in terms of the forces that would come together, 7,000 against 130,000. So by any stretch, the Israel should have lost. But what happened is that they went out there, and Israel won. And how that happened, who knows? But they just said that as the Israelites went out there, and their swords evidently found their mark, and they killed the Arameans, and then eventually the Arameans fled, and then Israel pursued them, and but Ben-hadad escaped, and they went up, so they went back home. And so that ended the siege. But then the prophet then came back. Let's go ahead and read that. I'll read some more of it here. Then the prophet then approached the king of Israel and said to him, "Go, strengthen yourself. Consider carefully what you should do, for at the turn of the year, that's in the springtime, the king of Aram will march up against you." Meanwhile, the servants of the king of Aram said to him, "Their God is a God of the mountains. That's why they were stronger than us. Let's fight them down in the plain. Then surely you'll be stronger than them. So this is what you should do: remove the kings, each of them from his post, and appoint governors in their place. Then muster an army like the army that you lost, horse for horse, chariot for chariot, and let's fight against them in the plain. And surely you'll be stronger than them." He listened to their advice and acted accordingly. All right. So when Ben-hadad was run off the first time, he figured, well, that's because our chariots couldn't really join the battle because we're up in these mountains, and the chariots are no good in those rocky places in the mountains. And so, but if we could lure them down into the plain area, that's what his advisors were telling him. If we could get them down into a plain area, then we should be able to fight them, and then we can use our chariots to the best effect. Chariots need pretty much flat, level ground, and not a lot of bumpy rocks and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, good luck. Well, there are places like that in Israel where it's nice flat land, but the rabbinical commentators say that this prophet was a guy named Micaiah, and Josephus also said that was who it was. Micaiah noted that in a later episode, Ahab had imprisoned him. That's in 1 Kings 22. And so, sure enough, exactly as God's prophet had warned Ben-hadad, the return of the year, or in the spring, he brought another attack against Israel. Now, the reason that the kings went out for battle, you remember we talked about David when he got into trouble there with Bathsheba. It said that it was the time of the year when kings went out to war and David stayed home. But why did they go out in the springtime? Well, because that's when the grass was growing. There was greenery so that the horses could be fed. And so it was easier for them to take their horses to battle when there was ample forage for the horses. And that it's as simple as that. All right. So then it came about that at the turn of the year that Ben-hadad mustered the Arameans, marched up to Aphek, to fight against Israel. Now the children of Israel were mustered, given provisions, and marched against them. But when the children of Israel encamped before them, they looked like two little flocks of goats, while the Arameans covered the land. Then the man of God approached the king of Israel and spoke to him, saying, Thus says Adonai, because the Arameans have said, Adonai is the God of the mountains, but he is not a God of the valleys. Therefore I will deliver all this great multitude into your land, and you shall know that I am Adonai. So he's telling them that I'm going to go ahead and I will deliver all of this great multitude into your hand. And so they encamped one over against the other, and on the seventh day, the battle was joined. Now the children of Israel struck down 100,000 of the Aramean soldiers in a single day. The rest fled back to Aphek into the city, and the wall fell upon 27,000 men that were left. But Ben-hadad fled into the city, into an inner chamber. His officials said to him, Look now, we've heard that the kings of Israel, they're merciful kings. Please, let's put on sackcloth on our loins and ropes on our heads and surrender to the king of Israel. Perhaps he will spare your life. So they girded sackcloth on their loins and burlap bags for underwear. That would have been tough. But put ropes on their heads, came to the king of Israel, and he said, Your servant Ben-hadad says, Please let me live. And he replied, Is he still alive? He is my brother. The men looked at it as a good sign and were quick to catch on, saying, Yes, Ben-hadad is your brother. Go bring him, he said. This is Ahab speaking. So Ben-hadad came and came out to him, and he took him up into his chariot. Then he said to him, The cities which my father took from your father, I will give back. You may set up markets for yourself in Damascus, as my father did in Samaria. Then I will let you go with this covenant. So he made a covenant with him right then and there and let him go. All right. Now, the text does not say, when we get down to this one thing I wanted to bring out, where it says the wall fell on 27,000 men and they killed them. All right, what that probably means, I'm not sure that it would mean that, one wall falling is going to kill 27,000 men, because they sure would have had to have been huddled up pretty tightly for that to have happened. But the idea of the wall falling is again, it's one of those idioms for meaning that the city fell. We would say, yeah, the city fell. Well, what do you mean it fell? Where was the city climbing? Was it sitting on a chair and it fell off the chair? No, it's an idiom that we use that said, okay, the wall fell and 27,000 men then were killed. And so it's said, though, that Ben-hadad was able to escape into an inner room someplace in the city of Aphek. We don't know what that was, where it was, or anything like that. But he said he did take refuge in there and trying to figure out, okay, how can I get out of this again? And so they his advisor said, well, the Israelite kings, they're pretty merciful guys. Maybe if we show the proper humility and so forth, that they'll have mercy on us. And so that's exactly what they did. But then let's go ahead and go on. Any comments or questions so far on this? All right, so we already talked about that. Let's put sackcloth on our heads and on our loins and ropes on our heads and surrender to the king of Israel. Don't know what the ropes on the head means, other than a sign of contrition. And so, anyway, goes on. The kings of let's see, that was the covenant then that Ahab made with the king of Aram up in Damascus. And let's see. So he said, and this is what he said: the cities which my father took from your father, I will give back, and you may set up markets for yourselves in Damascus, as my father did in Samaria. Then I will let you go with this covenant. So he made a covenant with him and let him go. So then it goes in the next we read in the scriptures is that one of the prophets said to one of his fellow prophets, by the word of God, God says for you to hit me, but the man refused to strike him. And when he says, because you did not obey the voice of Adonai, behold, as soon as you leave me, a lion will kill you. And as soon as he left him, a lion found him and killed him. Then he found another man and said, strike me, please. So the man struck him and wounded him. Then the prophet left and waited for the king on the road, disguising himself with a headband over his eyes. As the king was passing by, he cried to the king, your servant went out into the midst of the battle, and behold, a man turned aside and brought another man to me and said, guard this man. If by any means he is missing, then your life will be for his life, for else you will weigh out a talent of silver. Then as your servant was busy here and there, he was gone. The king of Israel said to him, so will your sentence be. You yourself have decided it. Then he quickly took the headband from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized him as one of the prophets. Then he said to him, thus says Adonai, because you have released out of your hand the man who I had devoted to destruction, therefore your life will be in place of his, and your people in place of his people. Then the king of Israel went home to Samaria, sullen and resentful. All right, this is a story, of the just incredibly stupid and ridiculous thing that Ahab did. He allowed Ben-hadad to live, and to just basically give him the terms of surrender, and it was just absolutely crazy. So, what about all the gold and silver that Ahab had paid him prior to that first battle? It didn't look like he demanded a repayment or anything like that. And so Ben-hadad didn't even promise him to build streets for Ahab in Damascus or whatever, but would allow Ahab to build them. So these cities Ben-hadad promised to give Ahab, they already belonged to Israel. Okay, these were things that Ben-hadad had taken. Well, these were already Israeli cities. So Ahab then basically brothered himself out of the spoils that should have belonged to the victor. And as a prophet soon would tell, he had brothered himself out of his own life, out of God's will, for sure. So let's see. I forget who said this quote here. It said, to set free a man with passionate hatred, immense ambitions, and boundless capabilities for warfare, binding him only with a pack thread of insincere promises, was the conduct of a fool. It was a terrible treachery against the interest of God's people. For Ahab not to clip Ben-hadad's wings. In fact, he should have killed him and make him incapable of future injuries against Israel. And so ordinary gratitude to God should have prompted Ahab to at least ask God, okay, what am I supposed to do here in this case? But he didn't do anything. He just made this covenant with Ben-hadad, and basically it was that was the kind of the beginning of the end for when Israel would cease to be a nation state, and God was just going to take away their protection from them, is what it amounted to. And so basically God came to Ahab and said, well, because you did this, we're going to just take everything that that you have, and the kingdom and the people. They're all going to suffer because of what you actually did here. And so then it said the king of Israel went home sullen and resentful. He was mad and everything. They had won the battle, but he looks like he had lost the war. So that's where he was going back home, and just was in just a bummer state of mind. So, and that ends where we are tonight. I did want to point out that because of the disobedience, Ahab's rule was going to be gone, and also God would have, by extension, he was going to punish the people of Israel. I mean, they weren't guiltless. He was going to punish them because of Ahab's sin. And we need to remember sometimes that our disobedience to God can certainly negatively affect many, many other people. And I think that's an easy one to try to figure out, that, if you are if you're a bank robber and you go into a bank and take money, well, if then the guard gets in front of you and you shoot and kill the guard, well, you've not only robbed a bank, but you've also killed a guard who had children, and he was a father, he was a husband, and so forth. So your actions then can directly affect other people. All right, so that is it for tonight. As far as what I've got, are there any comments or questions? Okay, I guess there are none. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off, and want to just there again wish everyone, then, if there are no other comments or questions, wish each of you Shavua Tov. Have a good week.
Yeah, you too.
And I plan on it. I've got already busy. Every week is busy. And those of you from Tree of Life, Kim Earhart, whatever her last name is, I'm having a moment. Kimberly Erland said that her mother was doing better, and that had gone down to 3 liters of oxygen, down from 6 yesterday, and that if they can get everything lined out well, then they'll send her back to just a regular room and not in the ICU or wherever it is that she's at right now. But
she's in our prayers.
Well, she sure needs to stay there. And so there's just all sorts of, there's several others within the congregation. I'm not at liberty to say that what it is and so forth and who it is, but there are some folks that do need our prayers for healing. So just pray for them, that the Holy Spirit would just flow through them and clean up all of the infections and so forth. What? It's just some cancer. There's some cancer, and there's some diabetes out there that is kind of out of control, and things like that. So just and then our nation, be in prayer about our nation, because